Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavadi Tamastu Ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman protect us. May he guide us and give us strength and right understanding. May love and harmony be with us all. Om Peace, Peace, Peace. And good evening. We are continuing our reading of works by Swami Ramakrishnananda, one of the direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna. It's been 2 weeks since we had a Thanksgiving holiday last week, and we are in the middle of the scheme for education in ancient India. And we are going to go back just one paragraph to sort of connect to what we were reading before. So we're talking about the 4 stages of life, basically, and the life of a brahmacharya and so forth. All right.
Our next reply?
Yes.
Our next reply is to being a useful member of society by doing good to it, that the ideas of usefulness and goodness vary in different individuals, inasmuch as they are materialistic or spiritually disposed. When a man is materialistic in his mood, that is to say, when he regards those alone to be true, which he can sense, the world of phenomena alone to him is always true, and giving up all concern with such a world is nothing less than madness, according to him. That this age is extremely materialistic is best attested by the fact that people nowadays have more love for the world than for anything that is beyond the world, the pursuit of which they term a chase after a wild goose. They may have no quarrel with those people who write big philosophies about mind and soul, bringing in all sorts of transcendentally whimsical theories regarding them. But when any philosopher tries to live according to the philosophy he has given birth to, he is looked down upon as a madcap. The highest aim of a writer of modern philosophical works seems to be having a good sale for his extraordinary works, filled up with all sorts of extraordinary theories, and procuring an extraordinary name and fame for him. Nowadays, the healer of the body is honored much more than the healer of the soul. Our old man says that whenever a doctor or physician visits your house, never accost him or give him a seat to sit upon. If he wants to sit, let him take his own seat. If he wants to talk, let him talk first. But when your priest or guru, the healer of your soul, comes, you see him at a distance, bow down and go up to him, and with great reverence bring him to your house. Offer him the best seat and wash his feet with cool, refreshing water. And drink a little of the water falling from his feet to purify yourself. In old India, people used to obey Manu, and therefore the healers of the soul were honored more than the healers of the body. Exactly opposite is the tendency of this age. Whenever a doctor or physician comes to a modern Hindu's house, he does not know how to receive him, how to satisfy him. And when his priest or guru comes to live with him for a few days, or wants some pecuniary help from him, he cannot but think him to be a troublesome individual. Of course, there are honorable exceptions to this rule. And as I have already said, exceptions always prove the rule. These 2 opposite behaviors of the ancient man and the modern man clearly point out 2 different ages. The ancient or spiritualistic, and the modern or materialistic age.
And of course, yeah, there always are sort of opposite tendencies that go on in the era around the year 1900. Few decades before and after that, there's a great deal of interest in metaphysics in the West among thinkers and philosophers, trying to figure out something because of Christianity had become somewhat weakened because you couldn't take things literally, and so they needed something, and so they were looking at sort of the spiritualist type of approach. They were trying to find evidence for life beyond death and that type of thing. And so there was a lot of, and there still is, interest in psychic research and that type of thing, and the independence of the mind from the physical brain. And but of course in India he's describing the situation there, and so he's probably accurately describing what was going on as India was becoming more westernized and getting more Western ideas. But his statement about philosophers writing great volumes, but if they try to follow it, they think he's a madcap. Reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. And she used to say she gives herself very good advice, but she rarely ever follows it. So sometimes philosophers are like that. They can write volumes of philosophy, but how many of them actually try to follow it? Okay. Want to continue?
We've already defined what modern materialism is. That is, regarding those to be the final truths which we can sense. There were also materialists in ancient India who used to hold that the creator, preserver, and destroyer of the universe is matter, and matter alone. These were the followers of Bhagavan Kapila, the father of Sankhya philosophy, the most ancient as well as the most perfect system of positive philosophy. Modern positivism, founded by Auguste Comte, which excludes from philosophy everything except the natural phenomena of properties of knowable things, and holds all inquiry into causes, whether efficient or final, to be useless and unprofitable, commits a great mistake by regarding the dependent and therefore unreal existence to be independent and real. Kapila, although he was a materialist, did not commit that mistake. To him, matter was altogether a different thing from which we see, touch, taste, hear, and smell. It is something unknown and unknowable, which, coming in contact with the senses, produces the universe of phenomena. So the subject matter of Kant's philosophy, instead of being an independent existence, is merely a result of the union of the self with the not-self, of Purusha with Prakriti. That philosophy, which deals with mere contingent truths, is not worthy of holding the holy and high title of philosophy, which literally means the love for real knowledge, or knowledge of the reality. The matter of Kapila is independent of the senses. Hence, the materialistic philosopher of Kapila's school must have to go beyond his senses if he wants to come face to face with Prakriti, or the primal matter, the mother of the universe. Even a materialistic of ancient India could not find solace in the world of phenomena. That is to say, could not find any charm in leading a worldly life. Much less could an idealistic or monistic philosopher of that period find any satisfaction in worldly pleasures. Indeed, the lover of truth, whether he be monistic or materialistic, must go beyond his senses and consequently must go beyond the world, which is born of the senses, to realize that truth. For what is truth? That which is always one and the same and consequently independent and changeless. How can phenomena be regarded as real in that case? Kant teaches us to worship the unreal. Is it preferable?
Yeah, so, and of course, there's also the Charvakas, which were the materialistic philosophers of India that really just believed in eat, drink, and be merry type of philosophy, and that there really wasn't much beyond the kind of existence that we're experiencing now. And Kapila, of course, in the Sankhya philosophy, really had Purusha and Prakriti, so that seemed a little confusing the way he was putting it there. But his point here, of course, is that the things that we see as matter are changeable, and the reality should be changeless, that which is beyond change. And so he's making a good point here, that how can we worship that which is changing? We should be worshiping the absolute truth, which has to be unchanging. Okay, let's continue and see what he says.
But though philosophically we may regard phenomena as unreal, 99.9% of humanity of the present day regard them to be the only real things for which alone life is worth living, especially such is the view that is always taken by a young man. And it is not strange. The young man has been freshly endowed with a body which has all its senses fully developed, with new energy, vigor, and life in them, each and every one of them which is trying to assert itself, calling upon the attention of its young votary. He has begun to enjoy life newly. Life has not yet become monotonous to him. Everything to him is new and beautiful and therefore attractive. To preach to such a man that the world is false, that his newly married wife as well as his newborn baby is false, that his home, friends, and neighbors are all false, is merely madness on the part of the preacher. What though he preaches the bare and varnished truth? He will be merely throwing away pearls before the swine, and so instead of being a wise man, he will play the part of a veritable fool.
Yeah, so the idea here is that our senses tend to drag us outward, and especially when you're young, they tend to drag you outward even worse than when you get older and wiser. So that's the caution here that he's giving people, is that just because you're young and you have active sense organs that are enjoying, in this lifetime at least, for the first time, you've probably led many lives before when you had similar experiences, but you don't remember them. So this new experience in this particular body, you feel primed to try to enjoy all the things that you're seeing and hearing and smelling and touching and so forth. And in reality, it's the world of Maya that is what you're experiencing. And what you need to do is to wake up from that world of Maya. It's funny, I just had a dream recently. I actually fell asleep listening to the Kindle reading to me. And so then I had this dream that I couldn't get the Kindle to turn off. No matter what I did, I couldn't get the Kindle to turn off. And I hid it in another room, and I could still hear it. No matter where I put it, I could still hear the Kindle. And of course, all I had to do was wake up, and then the problem was solved. So that's our current situation here, is that we're in the realm of Maya, and we need to wake up from the realm of Maya to our true unchanging nature. And then the problem will be solved. All right, let's continue.
The sages of ancient India found out this difficulty in the way of preaching truth to all. How are we to get over the difficulty? Truth must be preached, however unsavory it may appear to many. Medicine must be administered to cure the disease, however unpalatable it may be to the patient. As in order to make the patient swallow bitter quinine, yielded pills have been invented by our modern doctors. Ancient doctors of divinity invented similar means to make the young householder swallow those bitter doses of truth. They were not unacquainted with the art of gilding in order to make the truth acceptable and attractive. They began to compile the attractive life incidents of sages and kings, of the rich and the poor, and with them they composed such charmingly romantic poetical garlands, through which the thread of truth ran and kept the flowers in their places. That young customers began to flock from all quarters. And the demand for garlands was so very great that the sages kept on composing garlands after garlands, till almost the whole of the spacious hall of Sanskrit literature were filled up with the sweet-scenting Puranas, Itihasas, and Samhitas. In this way, the difficulty of preaching truth to all was meant by our ancient sages. It is our duty to take that lesson from them and avail ourselves of those invaluable garlands, the store of which is altogether inexhaustible, to bedeck our young people with.
You know, I'm old enough to remember when health food was a fad by a few fringe people. After the Second World War, it became very fashionable to eat a lot of junk food. It first became available, all of these prepared foods, Twinkies and Ding Dong donuts and all sorts of packaged sweets and white bread and all sorts of refined products and so forth. And Crisco oil was the hydrogenated fats that were supposed to be so convenient and so forth. And that's what became very popular during the time. So if you believed in health foods, you were considered kind of a nut. And they used to say that the health food slogan was, if it tastes good, spit it out. And so that's what that reminds me of here, is that sometimes what's good for you doesn't necessarily taste as good as something that is not so good for you. And it was difficult to break people of the habits of eating a lot of junk food, because junk food tastes good. It's designed to taste good and make you want to eat more. Whereas what's good for you sometimes doesn't taste as good until you acquire a taste for it, and pretty soon, as you begin to feel better, you realize that the health foods actually are better for you, and then that reinforces the idea that the taste is good for you, and that begins to you begin to think that it actually does taste better. And so it's similar in other things in life. If you think that a worldly life is a lot of fun and games, it's going to be difficult to distract you away from that. But as you begin to practice spiritual life, if you get enough blows in that type of worldly life, you'll begin to turn to spiritual life. And again, the beginning it might be a little slow, but eventually you get enough joy from the spiritual practice that you begin to see that that's really where the real joy is, and that those other pleasures were very fleeting indeed. All right, let's continue.
It is useless to preach abstract truth to a young man, as his mind is always practically disposed. Beauty is the ruling passion of his mind, and hence whatever you have to say, you must say beautifully if you want to make any impression on a young mind. In ancient India, a young householder was not therefore altogether void of spiritual truths, inasmuch as he had to imbibe them through those attractive books of divine and ennobling poetry. But a brahmacharin was not allowed to confine himself exclusively to those poetical works. He had to pass through a system of prosaic discipline and to grasp intellectually all philosophical truths which lie beyond the senses and hence beyond the world, so much so that occasionally a brahmacharin was found to become totally disgusted with even the idea of leading a married life, knowing it to be altogether false and misleading, and prefer sannyasa to garhastya, or family life.
You know, that brings another point in mind, that a lot of these spiritual truths were taught through the Puranic stories. And so you find that many people are fascinated by the Puranic stories, and that's why they were written, is because when you put things in story form, it's very attractive and people get very interested in it, and they're easy to remember. But unfortunately, it's also easy to forget the underlying spiritual message of the plot and the symbolism of the story, and simply get fascinated by the interesting plot. And it's similar thing has happened with fairy tales in the West, or folk tales, the Jataka tales of the Buddhist tradition, where these tales become simply fun stories to tell, and people forget that there's a deep symbolism behind them. And so that's the caution here, is that we always have to remember to keep the philosophical ideas that spawned these stories in mind. Okay, let's continue reading.
Some people may ask, is this not too hard for a brahmacharan? Then we request to study the characters of their own children. Should the children be given undue liberty? The child's mind is always after play, always after trifling things. If you allow him full liberty, he will grow up to be a shallow man, in no way different from an animal, merely eating, drinking, playing, and sleeping. The human child is intended for higher things than these. We should make a god out of him and not a beast. If this is true, it is our duty not to give him undue liberty. We should make him go through a strict course of discipline, and as an uninformed young mind is more plastic than the formed mind of a man, you can at that time give it any bend you like. What higher thing is there than truth? And which father will not like to see his child get the highest and best of all things? So it should be the duty of all parents to create a desire for the realization of truth in the minds of all that are children as soon as they begin to harbor the ideas of likes and dislikes. That's the reason why in ancient days our sages were so very strict in the matter of brahmacharans. They were their real friends, and hence they wanted to give an ennobling turn to their minds, which are extremely plastic, and hence docile at that tender age. What was apparently cruel was really most beneficial and ennobling.
Now, of course, the whole general theme of these writings is for thinkers on education. And so it reminds me of just the classroom in general, where you have various theories of education that have kind of come and gone throughout the ages, and they tend to swing back and forth between different extremes. One, that you just let the child experiment and kind of run wild and do whatever they want to do, and that's supposed to be the best way that they learn. And then the other extreme of being extremely strict and long hours of study and harsh discipline, spare the rod, spoil the child type of attitude. And of course, the difficulty is that different people respond to different kinds of treatment, and so no one treatment really is the best for all children. Sometimes discipline is very necessary, other times some freedom is necessary, and a nice balance between them, and the wisdom of the teacher to know when the student really needs which kind of approach. I remember one person, when he found out I was planning on being a teacher, which I was for about 6 years, he said, well, the thing you really need to learn is which student needs a pat in the back and which one needs a kick in the butt. He was a coach, so that's the way he talked. And that's really true. You really do need to know each student and which ones need which kind of approach. All right, so let's continue with what Swami Ramakrishnananda here is going to tell us.
Such brahmacharans are nowadays rare in India. The guardians and teachers of our young men are themselves materialistic, and is it strange that their wards also will be similarly disposed? But we have seen materialism or positivism can never raise a man higher than the level of a beast. And as the life of a beast can in no way be liked by any, it is not our bounden duty to save ourselves from being confined to that abject level and know how to do that. Modern philosophy dealing with unreal things can never give us any help towards ameliorating our condition. The world with all its charms can never promise us immortality, although most of the time of our life it deludes us into the belief that we are never to die. Then what to do and where to go? If we want to realize the truth, if we want to realize that we are really immortal, if we want to be the sharers of eternal bliss, if we want to step into that realm reaching which we will at once recognize ourselves as perfect, if we want to be the greatest, the best, and the highest, we must have to get beyond this universe. Or in other words, we must have to go beyond these senses. There is no other way. The sages have done the work for us. Indeed, bare, unvarnished truth cannot but be unpalatable to a man who is materialistic disposed, and who is not nowadays. But when that very truth is coated over with the sugar of poetry, and thus when abstractions take a concrete form instead of being repugnant, it appeals to our hearts.
And I think he's correct in that regard, is that when the philosophical truths are put into story form or illustrated by the lives of great saints and sages and avatars, that they sink into your subconscious, whether you're aware of it or not. And so then when you're ready for the philosophical truth and someone presents that to you, it connects to something that's already in your consciousness, at least your subconsciousness. So it comes out of your subconsciousness and becomes part of your consciousness at that time. So there is a great value to that great vast literature of the Puranic stories. All right, let's continue.
Can you name a single romance more attractive than the Mahabharata? And can you name a single epic which contains more solid truths or philosophy, or is grander than this, the grandest epic, the Mahabharata? It is the storehouse of all knowledge, all poetry, all attraction, and all charm. Such a charming teacher is sure to attract a young mind and is sure to appeal to his heart. Such being the case, can there be any doubt that this book of all books, this encyclopedia of all knowledge, this magnificent heaven-like and all-embracing palace of the muses, this mother of truth, not dazzling like the sun, but softened and mellowed like the moon, the invaluable receptacle of the divine Gita, this ocean of poetry, this Mahabharata is exactly what our young men need.
Now, of course, in our modern times, we have examples of things like the Harry Potter series and other great epics, some of the sci-fi space odysseys and so forth. Some of them end up with very philosophical themes, and those themes are really philosophy disguised as stories. And so the various messages are getting through to the public through that medium of film now that used to be in the form of the Puranic stories of India. So the ideas of truthfulness and honor and the faithful servant and the faithful friend and so forth are all embedded in some of these stories. And so they all play a role in helping to impart good ideals. Now, of course, there's some movies that don't impart good ideals. There are a lot of that are just either silly or, frankly, rather of poor taste and representing values that are not good. But there are some that do have those kinds of ideas embedded within them. And so there's sort of the modern versions, you could say, of the ancient Puranic stories. Superheroes and that sort of thing. You can think of when you look at the Mahabharata, you think, well, these are the superheroes of the ancient past, because they have similar kinds of magical powers and so forth that some of the superheroes might have. All right, well, let's continue with our second chapter here, Education Vedantic.
When the embryo in the womb attains its 7th month, it regains its self-consciousness, says the Upanishad. At that time, it is not at all conscious of anything else besides itself, because the lake of its mind is calm and quiet, without any thought, and all its past lives are, as it were, reflected in its mind. Remembering all that it has done in its previous lives, it repents for all its evil deeds, and prays to God to enable it to lead a purer life in the future. When it attains its 9th month then, with the increase of its bulk, it finds that the womb is too inadequate for its life, and then alone it begins to feel the existence of something else beside itself. It meets with resistance, the power resisting it, then its troubles begin. Now it wants to get rid of that trouble, since it does not like trouble. It wants a way to get out of the womb. In course of time, in this way, it willingly comes out into the world. But it is as good as going from the frying pan into the fire. For as soon as it comes out into the world, the cold atmosphere begins to bite the system. Self-created one, God, begins to pinch. The senses of the newborn baby are projected outward. And you know, wherever there is pain, there must be mind. And so the baby's mind, which was already self-centered, comes out of itself, becomes mindful of the senses, and then from the senses it comes into contact with the sense-born world. It begins to see all forms through the eyes, hear through the ears, smell through the nose, and taste through the tongue. It begins to experience the chill of the climate. This way, the conception of the world gradually comes into existence in it. In the meanwhile, it has altogether forgotten itself. The mind has been robbed out of itself and is now made to dwell upon the world external. It is not allowed to go in any more because it has come into the world. It will have to redress its grievances. It has got many wants. Danger presses upon it, and does not know anything except how to stand against all untoward environments. In the course of time, the baby becomes a boy. It gradually becomes more and more friendly with the world, owing to the fostering care of the parents and relatives. And when the boy becomes self-helping, he begins to enjoy the company of the world, rather than to avoid it. Of course, by this time, his mind has been altogether taken away from within it. The world is there before it, and it satisfies all its hungers. The most beautiful forms are supplied to meet the senses. How many wants are there in that little boy? It has been calculated, our philosophers have said, that men have got 11 senses. 5 Jahendriyas, 5 Kamadriyas, and 1 Marias, mind.
Manas, I think it says.
Manas, I'm sorry. With the help of these 5 sense organs, we sense the universe. And with the help of the organs of activity, we actively employ ourselves in this world to get all those things which we want to have. And the mind has the controlling power over all these other 10 organs.
Yeah, I should review some of the research on the reactions of the fetus in the womb. There's some research about at what time they start reacting to things in the external world, to sounds and so forth, whether they're exposed to certain kinds of music, certain kinds of speech, and so forth, and the kind of food that the mother is eating, or if unfortunately the mother is also ingesting various drugs of some sort, or smoking or drinking alcohol and that kind of thing. All of those things affect the fetus and the kinds of likes and dislikes that the young born is going to have. So there's interesting research that I'll have to research what age or how many months into the pregnancy those kinds of things start to be evident, that there's actual reactions of the fetus to things that are going on the outside. Those are interesting studies. So it'll be interesting to see how much they correspond to the ancient ideas. All right.
Now, man has also got 3 different moods: sattva, rajas, and tamas. When he has a tendency to be thoughtful, all his senses answer his purposes. All the senses will have a tendency to help his thinking. When he has to be active, all the senses help him to enable him to carry out whatever he likes. When he wants to sleep, all his senses also take part in his laziness. In this way, in 3 different moods, the 11 senses have each 3 different tendencies. So altogether, he will have 33 tendencies. For the tendency of the eye is to see, of the ear to hear, of the tongue to taste. So altogether, the 11 senses have 11 tendencies, and according to the 3 moods, these 11 tendencies multiplied by 3 becomes 33 in all. Again, as I said, the tendency of eye is to see all beautiful forms, but the number of these forms is innumerable. As in the case of the eye, so also in the case of other senses. However, the objects of our desires are innumerable. In other words, millions. And since 33 millions of desires a man has got, the world has been regarded in the Upanishads as unnumbered. The hunger of a man is not easily satisfied. Hunger is the desire to take in something. Hence, every desire is a hunger. For a hungry man with his 33 millions of desires, this infinite universe has been placed as a dish for him to enjoy in order to satiate his hunger. So he begins to enjoy it. I lost my place.
So he begins to enjoy it. Suppose the king. I can read for a while, and then you can catch up.
Also, we're used to 5 senses, 11 senses.
Yeah. Well, they're talking about the 5 organs of action as well. In other words, the hands and the feet and so forth. Yeah, so. All right, so he begins to enjoy it. Suppose the king is given to his subjects a grand banquet. He may have prepared innumerable delicacies, and in order that every delicacy may be properly served, one must be in charge of each delicacy, and then only the guests can be satisfied. Similarly, there is man with his 33 millions of desires, and there is also a power who has prepared these dishes for the enjoyment of man, and that power is God. God must have similarly got 33 millions of servants, each taking care of a certain delicacy, desire, which will satisfy the particular hunger of the individual. Hence, if there is a hunger in me that can be fulfilled only by God through his 33 million servants, hence the number of gods according to our scriptures is 33 million. They are regarded merely as servants of God, God being the master to order these servants, the functionaries. In this way, man goes on enjoying the universe. When a man's senses are perfectly developed, they want nothing but enjoyment, and with a little labor, he can have all his enjoyments. Gradually, he becomes older. His physical powers get diminished. Then exertion is not very palatable to him. He wants perfect rest. He will think that he will prefer to get things without in the least exerting himself to have them, without shedding the sweat of his brow. Rest alone is the end and the aim of his life. To get pleasures outside the body requires exertion, and the man has come to a stage when he dislikes exertion. When he does not get the objects of his pleasures, then alone he will begin to meditate. He who wants is an imperfect being. One who has wants. Okay, one who has wants is an imperfect being. One who is imperfect has got a good many troubles. Strength might be failing. The idea that there is death, and after death, where am I to go? What is to be done of my life? How can I give up my wife, children, and the world, which I have been ever thinking to be my home, and all that I love tenderly? What is there beyond death? All these questions come before him and torment him. Then he begins to think in the right direction. Had he been perfect, he would not have felt any want, and he should not have feared anything. Analyzing himself, he will find that he must die whether he wills or not. There is some power behind his control which must take him from the world. He also wants to be eternally happy. The fact that we will be able to get happiness shows that we must exert. A man must labor hard previous to attaining happiness. This is the human lot. With thoughts like these, he will be anxious to get out of this wretched life and seek the blissful home. Now, of course, this idea of these three modes of desires, the tamas, rajas, and sattva, it really indicates, too, that in looking at the things in the world, we have to be discriminating and realize that some of these things are tamasic. They will tend to cloud our vision and make us less apt to see the reality behind this universe. And there are some that are rajasic, which will lead us to activity in seeking them out. And then there are the sattvic ones, which have some revealing power to what's behind this universe. And so the sattvic desires and the sattvic things in the world are more conducive to spiritual life. And yet we also have to transcend those as well. But they help us to get out of the realm of the tamasic and rajasic things in the world. So try to tune your senses with some discrimination to the more sattvic things in the world, and then realize that those also can be transcended and gone beyond to the infinite, undivided, unchanging reality, which is completely blissful. It's consciousness and blissfulness itself. All right, now we've got another paragraph. You caught up?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Then the Vedas come to his rescue. Tells him that he's not to die, though he seems to die. Death is nothing but giving up a worn-out cloth and putting on a new one. As when my clothes get worn out, I must get fresh ones, so when this body becomes useless, the soul enters a new body. This is the meaning of death. So death is not an undesirable thing. Then the anxious mind gets some consolation from the Vedas. How is that ideal bliss to be secured according to the Vedas? If a man wants to realize that highest ideal where nothing but pleasure is to be found, absolute bliss, he will have to exert for it, perform sacrifices, be morally and charitably disposed, and he must be a proper brahmacharan. Believing in the Vedas, he goes on regulating his works. Previous to that, he was doing only those things which could satisfy his senses. And now he begins to regulate his senses, because the Vedas teach him that unless he is able to bring the senses under his control, he won't be able to realize the highest ideal, where nothing but the highest bliss is to be found. He looks on all living beings as his own, so many brothers and sisters. In this way, he attains a good deal of merit, by the aid of which he will realize Svarga after his worldly death. Svarga, heaven, is that place which is the root of all bliss, and where whatever you desire you will get immediately without exerting yourself, and where your pleasures will never be followed by pain. But you're not allowed to remain there forever. As long as you have the merit, heaven will be yours. When the merit is consumed, you will have to come back to this Kamabhumi to earn fresh merit. It is also said that there is some higher bliss than heaven, which is termed salvation. Hence, heaven is not the end and aim of man. The attainment of the pleasure there is not everlasting. The soul is hankering after something which is perennial. It does not like much exertion. When you once go to heaven, you have still the rotundity of going and coming. But man's by nature eternal. He does not want bliss for a short period only. Then he questions within himself, if the object of my enjoyment remains somewhat outside me, distinct from me, independent of me, then I cannot command it, because it may or not come to me. This present life is, of course, a slave to passions and carnal appetites. In order to satisfy those passions, and must bring the being who has the power of supplying me with those wants, my necessities of life. How much longer?
Yeah, this paragraph goes on forever, so we'll stop here and continue next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Filled with Brahman are the things we see. Filled with Brahman are the things we see not. From out of Brahman floweth all that is. From Brahman all, yet is it still the same. Om peace, peace, peace.
I don't know how I lost my place, but it's tricky.
Yeah.